Blood stained the bedroom walls, turning it into a grisly testament to possession. The girl's body lay motionless, next to her crazed cousin, who had become her executioner. Their forbidden affair, which began as a secret passion, ended in a horrific murder that shocked the entire community. The story begins in a small town in the Midwest, where life flowed calmly and predictably. In such an environment, any deviation from the established order became instantly noticeable. Two families, related by blood, often crossed paths at holidays and social gatherings. Among the teenagers who grew up side by side were cousins Alex and Sarah. Alex was 2 years older, with a reserved personality and a penchant for solitude. At school, he was considered odd. He rarely interacted with his classmates, preferring computers and books to noisy company. Sarah, on the other hand, was more open and sociable, attracting the attention of her peers. However, a special bond gradually developed between them, distinct from that of ordinary family members. Initially, it manifested itself in long conversations and confidential secrets. Alex found Sarah to be the only person who understood him. She, for her part, viewed her brother as a protector and advisor. Their friendship seemed harmless, but over time, it began to deteriorate. Alex's isolation and Sarah's emotional sensitivity created the basis for a dependency that gradually intensified. Their family noticed their closeness, but didn't attach much importance to it. Their parents assumed the teenagers had simply found common ground and were supporting each other. However, classmates and neighbors sometimes remarked that their behavior resembled more than just a family relationship. These comments irritated Alex, who, with his adolescent categoricalness, perceived any interference as a threat. Over the years, the emotional attachment developed into a secret attraction. Alex began to see Sarah not only as a sister, but also as an object of desire. He carefully concealed his feelings, but they found expression in obsessive control. He disliked it when Sarah interacted with other guys, and he jealously monitored her actions. Sarah initially perceived this as a sign of care, but over time she began to feel pressured. Attempts to distance himself from his brother provoked outbursts of anger. Outwardly, he remained composed, but internally, irritation was building. In a diary later discovered by investigators, he wrote of his thoughts that no one has the right to take her away. These words revealed the depth of his obsession. Despite the warning signs, Sarah continued to maintain contact with him. Perhaps it was habit or a sense of guilt toward a relative who depended so heavily on her that held her back. But at the same time, she tried to build normal relationships with her peers, which only fueled Alex's jealousy. Those around them noticed the changes. At family gatherings, the brother and sister kept to themselves, their conversations too intimate for their family. Their parents, however, attributed this to teenage difficulties. No intervention followed, allowing the situation to develop surreptitiously. It was at this stage that the seeds of tragedy began to form. Relationships that could have been thwarted by timely adult intervention continued to deepen. Alex became increasingly withdrawn, his thoughts focused on his sister. Sarah, for her part, experienced mixed feelings, a desire to be free of the pressure and a fear of losing the only person close to her who understood her. By the end of this period, their secret relationship had become a dependency. Alex perceived Sarah as property, and she as a heavy burden she couldn't let go of. Internal conflicts intensified, and it was these conflicts that laid the foundation for the future catastrophe. By the time Alex reached adulthood, his attachment to Sarah had become pathologically dependent. He no longer perceived their relationship as friendship or support. It had become inevitable and absolute. Any action from his sister that exceeded his expectations provoked a strong emotional reaction. A particularly difficult period for Alex was when Sarah began actively socializing with her peers. She graduated from high school and entered college in a neighboring town. This became the first serious test of their relationship. Alex perceived her departure as a personal betrayal. He accused her of leaving him alone, when in fact, Sarah was simply moving on with her life. After she moved, Alex began calling and texting her more and more frequently. At first, Sarah responded out of a sense of duty, not wanting to offend a relative. But over time, his pressure intensified. The calls became intrusive, and the number of messages exceeded dozens a day. In them, he sometimes expressed love and gratitude, sometimes threatened to commit suicide if she didn't answer. Neighbors and relatives noticed changes in his behavior. Alex lost interest in work and school and became irritable. His parents noticed he spent hours on the computer, monitoring Sarah's social media pages. He meticulously analyzed her every post, comment, and photo. Any hint of her interactions with other men was perceived as an insult. Sarah tried to maintain her distance. She increasingly didn't answer her calls and limited her communication. But this only increased the pressure from her brother. Alex began arriving unannounced in the city where she studied. He waited for her near campus and followed her on her way home. In conversations, he bluntly declared that he wouldn't allow anyone to interfere with their relationship. By this time, the family had begun to discuss the problem openly. The parents noticed Alex's obsessiveness and Sarah's concern. Several conflicts erupted between the adults and Alex. His father demanded he stop stalking his sister, and his mother tried to explain that he was ruining both his own and her lives. But all attempts at persuasion were unsuccessful. As the pressure mounted, Sarah experienced severe stress. Her grades began to decline. She withdrew and avoided socializing with her friends. Several times, she told her friends directly that she didn't know how to cope with her brother. They recalled that her words were laced with fear. Meanwhile, Alex was moving from words to more violent actions. A diary seized by police after the crime contains entries from this period. In them, he described Sarah as the meaning of his life and simultaneously wrote of his readiness to do anything if she turned her back. These entries revealed not only emotional instability, but also a growing sense that the only way out was extreme measures. Psychological dependence increasingly escalated into aggression. Alex began displaying outbursts of anger, including toward others. He was seen arguing on the street and even getting into fights. However, the family attributed this to a difficult age, not directly linking it to his relationship with his sister. The culmination of this period occurred when Sarah invited a young man she had begun dating to her home. Alex found out and broke into her apartment that same evening. They had a heated argument, during which he threatened him and declared that no one has the right to be near her. The incident was reported to relatives, but the police were not involved. The parents hoped to resolve the issue within the family. However, it was after this episode that the tension reached its breaking point. Sarah increasingly avoided her brother, while he, on the contrary, tightened his grip. His thoughts increasingly centered on the idea that losing his sister would be the end for him. According to his own writings, it was during this period that he began to formulate plans in which murder was seen as the only way to keep her forever. Thus, the second stage of their story became crucial in the escalation of the conflict. The attachment that had been uncontested in adolescence developed into a pathological dependency. The family's and Sarah's own attempts to limit Alex's influence proved belated and ineffective. The pressure intensified, boundaries blurred, and the situation inexorably approached a tragic end. By the beginning of the following year, tensions between brother and sister reached a breaking point. Alex completely lost the ability to perceive Sarah as an independent person. His behavior became threatening not only to her, but to the entire family. Sarah increasingly told her parents she couldn't cope with his pressure. She tried to cut off contact, but this only intensified the stalking. Alex showed up at her house or college almost daily. Neighbors recalled that he would sit in his car in the yard for hours, waiting for her to emerge. His control manifested itself in everything. He demanded reports from her about where and with whom she spent time, checked her phone, and read her messages. One evening, Sarah abruptly refused him access to her things, which provoked open aggression. According to eyewitnesses, Alex exploded into a scream, accusing her of infidelity and betrayal. The parents recognized the danger, but limited themselves to talking. They hoped the situation would resolve itself over time. Law enforcement never intervened. Sarah herself hesitated to file a report, owing to her attachment and fear of public condemnation. At the same time, Alex's mental health problems worsened. He withdrew, lost his job, and cut off social connections. A diary later discovered contained entries containing direct threats. If she leaves, it will all end in bloodshed. These words became a warning sign that none of his loved ones noticed in time. The crisis culminated in an incident involving Sarah's new boyfriend. That evening, Alex showed up at her apartment unannounced and found them together. A confrontation ensued. Neighbors called the police because of the noise, but by the time they arrived, the conflict had already been resolved. A verbal warning was all that was required. For Alex, this was humiliating. He perceived the police intervention as a threat of exposure and a complete loss of control over his sister. After this incident, Sarah openly told her loved ones that she was afraid of her brother. She avoided meetings and limited her interactions, but he continued to try to force his presence on her. According to her friends, Sarah appeared exhausted, spoke of constant fear and an inability to escape the pressure. Alex increasingly convinced himself that the only way out was to take the extreme step. In a note he made several weeks before the tragedy, he wrote, "She belongs to me, and no one can take her away." This thought became firmly ingrained in his mind, becoming a justification for the future crime. Thus, the crisis period revealed a complete breakdown of boundaries. The family's attempts to intervene proved futile, and the reluctance to involve the police deprived Sarah of protection. Alex escalated from emotional pressure to open aggression, and the threat of physical violence became increasingly real. The situation was developing in such a way that tragedy was inevitable. By spring, the situation had reached a point of no return. Alex had completely lost control of his emotions. His obsession with his sister had escalated to the point where any action she took was perceived as an insult. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying to build a new life, studying, meeting new people, and relationships. But her steps toward independence only intensified her brother's aggression. On the day of the tragedy, Sarah returned home in the evening after classes and meeting with friends. Alex was already nearby. According to the investigation, he waited for her near the apartment for several hours. In his hands, he was holding a knife he had purchased several days earlier. Experts later confirmed that the purchase was not random, but planned in advance. When Sarah entered the apartment, Alex followed her. An argument broke out between them. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams and bangs. They described Sarah's voice as desperate, begging them to leave her alone. Alex shouted back, accusing her of cheating and betraying him. At some point, he resorted to physical violence. According to the case file, he stabbed his sister several times in the chest and abdomen. Forensic experts recorded more than 10 wounds, some of which were fatal. Sarah tried to resist, but her strength was too much. She lost consciousness a few minutes later. After this, Alex made no attempt to escape. He remained in the apartment next to the body. According to investigators, he sat motionless for about an hour and then began calling his mother. In the conversation, he admitted that it was all over and she wasn't going anywhere anymore. His parents immediately called the police. When the police arrived, Alex was in shock. He opened the door without resistance. Inside, the police discovered Sarah's body and a bloody knife on the floor. Alex was detained at the scene, his clothes and hands covered in blood. Later, the investigation revealed that he planned the crime as a decisive step. His diary entries indicated that he viewed the murder as a way to stop the betrayal and keep her forever. These entries became key evidence of intent, ruling out the theory of a random outburst. The event left a strong impression on the neighborhood. Neighbors who had known the family for many years were shocked. They said they had noticed conflicts, but could not have imagined such a tragic outcome. For the police, however, the picture was clear. Motive, preparation, and immediate execution were evident. Thus, the moment of the crime marked the culmination of a long process of obsession. All the warning signs that had manifested themselves earlier were translated into direct violence. From words and threats, Alex moved on to action that took the life of his sister and destroyed the fate of the entire family. After Alex's arrest, police immediately launched an investigation. From the outset, the case presented no difficulties in establishing the facts. The crime was committed in full view of neighbors, the arrest occurred on the spot, and the suspect possessed physical evidence, a knife and bloody clothing. However, investigators had to piece together the full story and determine the motives behind the murder. Initial interrogations revealed that Alex was in a state of extreme emotional agitation. His statements were contradictory. He sometimes admitted his guilt, sometimes claimed he had acted in the heat of the moment, and was out of control. Investigators, after examining his diaries and correspondence, concluded that the crime bore the hallmarks of premeditation. Entries made several weeks before the murder contained direct references to a possible final solution, indicating premeditation. The family found themselves in a difficult situation. The parents testified about a long-standing conflict and their son's obsessive behavior, but admitted they had failed to seek help from the police or specialists. This circumstance sparked widespread public debate, with discussions raging about whether the tragedy could have been prevented with timely intervention. During the investigation, psychiatric experts examined Alex. Their conclusion revealed that he suffered from a personality disorder with pronounced signs of addiction and pathological jealousy, but was not deprived of the ability to understand his actions. This meant that his sanity remained intact, and he could be held criminally responsible. The evidence collected included testimony from neighbors who heard screams on the day of the murder, footage from security cameras in the courtyard recording his arrival at the house, and a medical report on the nature of the wounds. All evidence pointed to the intentional nature of the murder. The trial began several months later. Alex appeared detached during the hearing. He admitted to the murder, but insisted he had acted under the influence of emotion. His defense attorneys attempted to mitigate his guilt, arguing that he had suffered a mental breakdown. However, the prosecution presented evidence of preparation: the purchase of a knife, diary entries, and his own words in a phone conversation with his mother after the crime. The hearings were held amid heightened public scrutiny. The press actively covered the trial, focusing on the unusual motive: obsession between relatives. This gave the case particular resonance. Journalists raised questions about the mental health of young people, how social media exacerbates addiction and control in relationships, and a lack of attention to early warning signs of violence. At the end of the trial, the court found Alex guilty of premeditated murder. The sentence was harsh: a long prison sentence without parole for the first few decades. The judge noted in his decision that the crime was committed in cold blood, with elements of planning, and posed a particular danger to society. The parents were present at the sentencing. According to media reports, the mother wept and the father remained reserved. The family lost their daughter and simultaneously faced the fact that their son would spend a significant part of his life behind bars. For the family, this was a double tragedy, the consequences of which will remain with them forever. Thus, the investigation and trial confirmed that the murder was not the result of a sudden fit of passion, but of a long-term obsession that had developed over years. The investigation reconstructed the full chain of events, from teenage intimacy to pathological addiction and the violent end. Sarah's murder was the result of her brother's years of addiction and obsession. The court found him sane and sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. The story ended tragically. One life was cut short. Another was forever shattered by prison walls.